For me, the New England Patriots story will be dominated, just in my own particular memory, by the attempt by Governor John Rowland to bring the franchise to Hartford. And that will be part of today's rambling conversation, rambling in a very structured and intelligent way, of course, about the New England Patriots, one of the most incredibly dominating franchises in the modern history of sports, and one that was kind of really rescued from near oblivion by Robert Kraft and his family. Of course, Robert Kraft and his family and Coach Belichick, these are all people who become very, very controversial in lots of different ways. It's the team everybody loves or the team that everybody loves to hate, probably more of the latter than the former. We'll talk more with Jeff Benedict after this news. Hi, this is Colin. This is a show that we did last year before Tom Brady won a Super Bowl as a Tampa Bay quarterback. So you're going to notice that idea is missing, and that's why, because we did the show last December during week 14 of the 2020 NFL season. But it's not really about that anyway. It's about so much more. And to me, still the most fascinating part of any show about the New England Patriots is not so much their incredible dominance of the NFL in a way that no other team since the Green Bay Packers in their heyday ever did. It's the attempt by Connecticut to steal them away from Massachusetts. And our guest today, Jeff Benedict, knows a whole lot about that.
Adam Vinatieri, no time on the clock, and the Patriots have won Super Bowl 36. Unbelievable.
From the 1-yard line, it's Rod Smart, the 20. Runs out of room, and the Panthers run out of time. The New England Patriots claim their second Super Bowl championship in 3 years.
Rodney Harrison takes it in, and 9 seconds remain. And the New England Patriots are on their way to solidifying their team as an NFL dynasty.
There's a lot of bright sunshine right now in Foxborough and all over New England. The New England Patriots are the NFL champions.
He's in! Patriots win the Super Bowl! Brady has his 5th! What a comeback!
And there it is! The dynasty continues!
In the 60s, you think of Green Bay. In the 70s, the Steelers. In the 80s, the San Francisco 49ers. The Cowboys in the 90s. And the New England Patriots will be the first dynasty of the 21st century.
Okay, that was mildly painful to listen to. So I want to say 3 things here at the beginning of the show. I hope I remember what all 3 of them are. The first one is, so I know some of you are not sports fans. I'm looking at you, Patrice Fitzgerald, and you just turn the show off. Don't do that, all right? Because we are going to talk about this team, but I mean, we're not going to be talking about gap responsibility in 3-4 defensive sets. Not that you know what that means anyway. We're going to be talking about human beings and politics and money and all kinds of other stuff. And Gisele Bundchen. That was number 1. Number 2, I want to dedicate the show to my sort of son-in-law, Jamie Cameron, and to my sort of grandson, Charlie Cameron, who are wonderful, nice people, despite being diehard, lifelong New England Patriots fans. What's the third thing? Oh, yeah, there's going to be a point in this show where I'm kind of almost going to be like a guest, and that's the sort of whole move the Patriots to Hartford thing, and that's just because I played a larger than usual journalistic role and all that. I have things to say. But most of the talking is going to be done by my guest. Jeff Benedict is a special features writer for Sports Illustrated and author of 16 books. His latest is The Dynasty, which I hold here in my hand. It just has those words, his name, and a New England Patriots football helmet on it. That's all you really need to know. So, Jeff Benedict, welcome back to our show.
Hey, it's great to be back. Thanks for having me on.
So, I think you would make the case, and I'm going to ask you to do that the little thing that we hear Joe Buck or Jim Nantz or somebody saying at the end of that montage is, if anything, kind of an understatement. It isn't simply that there's a sequence of decades in which one football franchise after another becomes a dynasty. You really think that the Patriots belong in a much smaller group of dominant sports franchises that transcend mere football success. So make that case.
Yeah, Colin, that's actually a pretty easy case to make, because in the 100-year history of the National Football League, there's never been a team, an organization, that's won 6 championships in a 20-year span with the same 3 principles in place: the owner, Robert Kraft, the head coach, Bill Belichick, and the quarterback, Tom Brady. There's really legitimately been, probably 4 dynasties before them. There were the Packers in the 60s who won a couple Super Bowls. There was the Steelers in the 70s who won 4, the 49ers in the 80s and early 90s, and then the Cowboys who won 3 in the early 90s. These guys have won 6. They've been to 9 in that 20-year span. And what's really separated them from everyone else in football is the length or longevity of the marriage between the quarterback and the coach. So I think the discussion that they belong in is not whether they're the best dynasty in the history of football. That's kind of an open and shut case. It's where do they sit with other dynasties, like the Yankees of the DiMaggio and Mantle era, or the Celtics of the Bill Russell era. And I think that, or maybe the Bulls of the Michael Jordan era. And I think that this team sits with probably those 3 teams in the conversation about the greatest dynasties in American history.
So this book is in many respects a profile of a kind of 3-cornered relationship. You've already kind of made reference to it in our conversation. On the one hand, there's Robert Kraft, the well-known owner of the New England Patriots. Then there's Bill Belichick, the longtime coach. And then the third corner, obviously, is Tom Brady. And in a way, it seems as though, reading the book, that you feel, and I think many people feel, that if you take any one of those corners away and replace it with almost anybody else, you don't have the phenomenon you just described, that there's something about the balance among these 3 men that creates a very special entity that it's even hard to put a name on. So maybe you could just say a little bit more about that. Just very quickly,
Sure.
Describe these 3 people to people who maybe don't know them all that well.
Late in the process, I spent 2 years inside the organization and had a lot of access to these guys in the organization. Near the end of the reporting process, I visited Robert Kraft in New York he has an apartment that overlooks Central Park. It's the first time that I had been there. I'd been with him a lot by now, but I'd never been to this apartment. When you walk in, you look across the room, and there are these 2 big windows that overlook Central Park. And in between them were 2 framed pictures of the Beatles. These pictures of the Beatles were taken when they first came to America to appear on the Ed Sullivan Show. And they were signed by the Beatles, authentic signatures. When Robert Kraft came into the room, I asked him about the pictures, and he told me those pictures were taken in the building we were standing in. And he started to talk about how much he loved the Beatles when they were a band, and how sad he was when they broke up so prematurely when they were on top of the world. And I started thinking about how he looked at Brady and Belichick all these years. He really did see them as the NFL's version of Lennon and McCartney. They were the 2 best in the world at what they did. He had both of them on his payroll. And he understood how hard it was going to be to keep a coach like Belichick and a quarterback like Brady married for very long. His whole tenure as an owner was about how to keep them on the same stage, these 2 bright stars that both burned so hot. And I think the fact that he kept them together for 20 years was really a function of 2 things. Number one, he formed a relationship with Tom that was more like a father-son relationship. He describes Tom as his 5th son. And Tom was really close with Brady's sons as well. They were like brothers to him. And secondly, he had a very different relationship with Bill Belichick. Belichick is more distant, but it's a professional relationship that involved a great deal of trust. He really viewed Belichick like his business partner in this venture of running a football team. And those two relationships keep the quarterback and coach together. And the reason that's so critical is because Brady and Belichick off the field are a lot like Lennon and McCartney were at the end, where they would go into the studio at Abbey Road and make incredible music. But as soon as they walked out of the studio, they wouldn't go to a pub together and have beer. They'd go their separate ways. And that's really how Brady and Belichick were. It's a miracle in many ways that they played together for 20 years. That's the secret, was they had two weapons on their side of the field that were the best in the game. I think if they were separated, sure, Brady would have won some Super Bowls and Belichick would have won some as well, but they wouldn't have won 6 and been to 9. And I think the genius of the owner was he figured that out really early.
Let me since you're mentioning Belichick a little bit. First of all, the most fascinating portrait in the book, I think, is of Robert Kraft, who I think comes across as a very different person than I had imagined him to be. And you get a guy who is so close to Elton John that, when he and his wife celebrate a big wedding anniversary, Elton John just shows up and plays music for it. And you get a guy who really does sort of agonize about things like drafting a guy like Christian Peter and then finding out that he really, has a terrible series of accusations against him about sexual violence towards women, and really winds up doing a very hard thing about it. I don't know. His conscience and his complexity really kind of jumped out at me. Belichick, I think a lot of people find this guy an enigma. And he's, for people who don't know, this is a guy who really kind of dresses like a homeless person. He wears a hoodie that often has the arms kind of cut off at the shoulders. He wears a perpetual scowl on his face when you see him at the beginning of the game. A reasonable conclusion would be that right before exiting the locker room, he ate a live kitten, just to sort of get himself in the mood he needs to be in to win a game. So to what degree did you manage to see past all of that and see, do you have like a better sense than the average person of who Bill Belichick really is? Or is he just really that guy?
I think, one of the most important jobs, one of the most important aspects of my job is to observe and listen a lot more than talk. And so early on in this project, I would say for the first season, which would have been the 2018 season for me, I watched these three men an awful lot, and I watched them up close. I was in the locker room when the team would come off the field. I wasn't there to ask questions or conduct interviews. I was there to observe, to keep my mouth shut and see things. And I watched all three of them and the way they interact with each other, the way they interact with the rest of the team. You can learn a lot just by watching. And I think that Belichick, he is unique. He is very different. He has this ability, which, by the way, Robert Kraft doesn't possess this ability, which is to emotionally divorce himself from the very difficult part of the business, which is cutting players, saying goodbye, letting go of guys, often when they're at the peak of their career, when they're at star level or star status. He lets them go. And these are guys that have become very attached to the fan base in New England, who are part of the fabric of the community. And he cuts them without a second thought. That's something that the owner isn't capable of doing, but he knows Belichick is, and he appreciates the need for someone with that capacity as his head coach. And I think that's part of the complexity of their relationship. They are extremely different men, but there are moments like when Bill Belichick's father dies, which is a really interesting moment in this story, I think. Belichick finds out about his dad passing in the middle of the night. To Belichick's credit, he'd been on the phone with his dad hours earlier. They talked all the time. When he found out his dad had passed, he notified Robert. And the next day, the Patriots had a game. Belichick showed up and coached. Kraft figured he wouldn't coach, that he would get home and be with his mother and get ready for the funeral. But Bill's point was, my father would want me to do this. This is where I should be. And the only player who knew in advance of that game that Bill had lost his father was Tom. And that's because Robert felt it was important to tell Tom. So Tom plays that game knowing that Bill has lost his father. None of the other players know that. And then as soon as the game is over in the locker room, Bill discloses to the team that his dad passed away the night before. It's the first time that the 53 players on the Patriots roster had ever seen Bill vulnerable. And it's an interesting moment. I interviewed numerous players about that moment, and they said they were spellbound, they were stunned, and they really didn't know how to respond because they'd never seen him that way. And then there's a very touching moment after Bill tells that to the team. Robert steps forward and gives him the game ball in honor of his dad, and they hug each other. And the reason that's a big deal is because Robert hugs a lot of people a lot, and he and Tom have that kind of relationship. But Bill is not that kind of guy. He's not a touchy-feely, emotionally expressive man. But in that moment, he was. And I think so there are these moments in the story where you see insights into who these three men are, and you also see how different they are. But in some really personal, emotional ways, they have a tightness between them that I just think is really unique in sports.
So before we get to the end of this first segment, we have to talk about the chapter that I immediately turned to because I'm a human being and I can't help myself, and then it gave me PTSD to read it. It's a chapter called Dear John. It is about a story that begins more or less in the spring of 1998. Robert Kraft is unhappy with the facilities in Massachusetts. The Massachusetts legislature is showing no signs of giving him what he wants, which is a very large public to private transfer of money to build a stadium, which we have become very accustomed to these days. And then he gets this very peculiar offer from the state of Connecticut. And I'll let you pick up the story, Jeff. Explain what happens.
I think the thing to start with is Robert Kraft didn't want to take his team anywhere out of Massachusetts. He had offers from Rhode Island and other places to go, but he had a long battle going with the State House in Massachusetts. They were not willing to support basically any construction of a new stadium. And it got to the point where the Patriots had the worst stadium in the NFL. They had to get a new building. And when it was clear that it wasn't going to be in Massachusetts, Governor Rowland actually approached the Patriots. He specifically approached Jonathan Kraft in Montville, Connecticut, where the Krafts own a paper mill, basically. And Rowland was visiting there while campaigning for his last term as governor. And at that facility, Jonathan was there to greet him. And Rowland was astute. He knew what was going on in Massachusetts, and he let Jonathan know that he was interested in talking to his father about the prospect of the team coming to Connecticut, and that they would treat him a lot differently than he was being treated in Massachusetts. One thing led to another. They got going in conversations. They had meetings. They went to each other's homes. They started to build a rapport. And when it was really clear to the Krafts that it was not going to happen in Massachusetts, they decided to enter into this agreement with the state of Connecticut. It's important to say that they knew this wasn't their top choice, but it seemed like their only choice at that point. And really, Rowland offered the kind of deal that you can't refuse. The state was paying for everything. And with the guarantees that were built into this offer, it would have made Mr. Kraft the wealthiest owner in the NFL, and it would have happened fast. There was a ton of guaranteed money. In fact, too much.
Oh yeah, let me just jump in here, Jeff. It was an obscene deal. And Rowland's entire philosophy at the time was, how can I get this franchise to do something it doesn't want to do? I will offer them the sun, the moon, and the stars. on behalf of my taxpayers who will eventually be having to pay for this. And the degree to which this was unprecedented in the history of the NFL, unprecedented in the history of professional sports in terms of one state's just insane largesse to another team, really, really bothered me at the time. I remember kind of fly-specking the deal when we first got a chance to look at it. I mean, beyond this, all this incredible stuff where basically Connecticut would pay for almost everything and the Patriots would pay almost nothing. It was even the case that, like, let's say Bruce Springsteen or Elton John, for that matter, did a concert on the grounds of this stadium, which the taxpayers of Connecticut had built sometime when the Patriots weren't using it. The concession profits from, like, popcorn would go to Robert Kraft. Connecticut wouldn't even keep money from times when the stadium wasn't even being used for Patriots activity. It was just unbelievable at the time. And what was amazing, Jeff, and then I'll let you start talking again, was that basically in Connecticut, the vast majority of people just thought it was wonderful. The Hartford Courant, in the most toxic forfeiture of its obligation to report on things, put out an extra, like it was VE Day or something, that said touchdown across the front. So much for the idea that we're really going to look critically at this deal and see whether it really is sufficiently advantageous to the state of Connecticut. No, they just called it a touchdown because it existed. Can you tell I'm bitter?
Yes. I think that, at the time, $374 million in authorized state funding to build a stadium, and the deal structured the way it was, it did seem like an obscene deal. And it's not really, there's not much point in sort of relitigating that now. However, I would say that it's interesting. If you came to today and looked back, that number looks a lot smaller than it did then. And I think if you look at what the Patriots have done since that deal fell apart, just look at what's happened in the last 20 years. Think about all the winning. Think about all the Super Bowls, all the playoff games that have been played in Foxborough, nationally televised, how they became basically the most important sports franchise to the network of CBS. Think about the Patriots Place shopping plaza that has gone up in a place like Foxborough where there's no other reason to go to Foxborough. And it's not on a highway. It's not near a city. And they have movie theaters and stores that range from, Bass to Trader Joe's to it is a massive operation that's now in Foxborough making tons of money. You do have to at least ask the question with an open mind, how different would Hartford be today if that deal had gone through with the state paying that money to build the stadium and bring in what became the greatest sports team of the 21st century to Hartford with all those championships and all of the other business that could have gone up around it? It's at least worth the debate of whether that was such a bad deal or not. Because here's the thing, at the time, nobody knew that the Patriots were going to go on this winning streak. We have to remember in the late 90s, they had never won anything. And so in hindsight, that deal doesn't look so bad for Connecticut. It actually looks like it could have turned out to be a really good deal. We really won't ever know that. But look, when Robert Kraft paid what seemed like an obscene amount of money to buy the Patriots a few years earlier, the most expensive price tag in the history of the NFL for the worst team in the league at the time, that deal looks like a steal today.
So we're not going to relitigate it because we don't have time, but also because there would be no point. But so there, when it was all over, and by the way, there's a terrific scene in Jeff's book, which I had never heard before, which involves John Rowland when he realizes the Krafts are maybe about to walk away from this deal, offering to bend over a chair and have various things inserted in his person, which might have been kind of a predictive moment given the way his life went later. But I won't say anything more about it. But so, when it was all over, Jeff, there were these kind of multiple theories around. One of them was that Hartford had always just been bait, basically, that that had been misdirection, that there had been no intention to come here. Kraft was simply trying to leverage more support, more public support in Massachusetts. There was another theory that, as Robert and Myra Kraft went around to galas and dinner parties and stuff like that up in Boston, there was like this "what are you doing to us" thing that was beginning to weigh on him. I have always subscribed to the theory, and I had a pretty good view of this at the time, and it's pretty much there in your book the same way, that at a certain point, Robert Kraft, who is a very smart man, concluded he could not always trust the things that John Rowland told him. If John Rowland said something had been taken care of, that didn't really mean that that thing had been taken care of. It didn't mean the EPA was satisfied about something. It didn't mean that CTG was willing to move its steam plant or whatever it was being talked about, that he suddenly realized that some of the stuff this governor had been saying to him was BS, and that was really enough to make him back away from this table groaning with goodies. But give us your interpretation of why there wasn't the Hartford New England Patriots.
I think that I certainly understand why at the time most people, particularly in Connecticut, I was in Connecticut at the time. I'm in Connecticut now. I know how people in our state felt about it. It looked like, from the outside looking in, that this state was used as bait, as leverage, and that just wasn't the case. It's true that he didn't really want to come here, but he knew he had to come here. And you don't go to the extent of notifying your season ticket holders that their tickets will be honored in Hartford unless you're going to Hartford. I mean, they were coming. And Jay Malsinski, who had longtime been Governor Rowland's right-hand man and his lobbying firm worked for the governor, he got permission to work for the Krafts in this particular case. And, I spent time with Jay for the book. I interviewed him. I interviewed Governor Rowland's lawyer. They were really coming. I think the turning point was, there were two things. The relationship between Rowland and Kraft started to sour when Kraft started raising difficult questions about issues involving the property where the stadium was going to be constructed. They were legitimate questions. The steam mill was still there, and the state was at a standstill. There was no telling when they were going to get the owners to come to terms and get the steam mill out of there. That was when Rowland had the press conference and threatened to tear it down himself. I mean, there was stuff like that. And when Kraft was asking for extensions on timelines, Rowland started to become less the friend that he was in the beginning and more petulant, more angry, more like a bully, and less like a business partner. And I think that was a telling moment for Kraft, who builds long-term relationships of trust. I think the other thing was the state of Massachusetts finally realized they were really losing the Patriots, and that some of the people in government, the governor in particular, and the head of the Senate realized that they couldn't let the House of Representatives in the state dictate whether they lost the team or not. So they went backdoor and reached out to the commissioner's office in New York. And the commissioner wanted all along to keep the Patriots in Massachusetts. He didn't want them in Connecticut because Connecticut was the market territory of the Giants and the Jets. And it would cause big problems in the league if the Patriots moved into it. And so they had a mutual interest in New York and in Massachusetts to partner and figure out a way to not to keep the Patriots in New England, but to bring them back from Hartford, because they really were legally in Connecticut at that point.
All right, we're going to have to stop there. You want to know more about it? And that's just one chapter in this sprawling book. Everything you want to know about is in this book. I mean, if you want to know things about the New England Patriots. The book is The Dynasty. We're going to talk more to Jeff Benedict when we come back.
So Brady, pull me closer to more Super Bowl exposure. Raise that MVP award while you're hoisted on our shoulders. Throw that pass that beats the corner off that pump fake that you sold to your teammate Amendola. TD Edelman, it's over.
All right, we are back. We're talking to Jeff Benedict. His book about the Patriots is called The Dynasty. So, there's a way in which, yes, the Patriots have approached perfection in a way that very few sports franchises do. They also timed it all out perfectly for you because it seems like that period is probably kind of over. But there's also a way in which, and maybe these things are all tied together, the Patriots excite a kind of anger and disdain from people who are not Patriots fans. In other words, it's not just sort of Patriots fans or not a Patriots fan, right? It's Patriots fans, and then I hate the Patriots so much. I mean, Tucker Ives has probably resigned from his job because we're even doing this show. So, I mean, where do you think all that comes from? Is it just the success, or is it something else?
I think that obviously to be beloved is a sign of success. But in sports, the ultimate sign of success is to be hated. And the Patriots are universally hated, the most hated team in the NFL. The only team that I can think of that has generated this degree of hatred is the Yankees of yesteryear, not the current Yankees, but the Yankees of old. And obviously the common parallel between the Yankees of old and the New England Patriots of today, or at least of the last 20 years, is they just won so much more than everybody else. In competitive sports, that's the ultimate achievement, I think, is when every other sports franchise in your industry despises you. That's the clearest signal that you are head and shoulders above everybody else. And I think that that's what comes with the degree of winning that Belichick, Kraft, and Brady generated over the last 20 years. And so for New Englanders, it obviously became a badge of honor, a source of pride. It's why there are so many T-shirts and signs that say New England versus everybody. And it really helped the Patriots, actually, in terms of how they prepared for games, the sense of us against the world within the building of Gillette Stadium, and also when they went out on the road. I think it's part of their success formula.
There's also this interesting kind of paradox that I see at the heart of the Patriots in terms of their style, which you may or may not agree with. I mean, in a way, I think as just an outsider looking at the Patriots, they seem like really kind of a model of discipline. There's a way in which Belichick has invented this system where you kind of you figure out what's there and you take it. You as rarely as possible do you force something that's not there. There's just sort of a very cool calculation about this, and it extends to what you were talking about before, which is deciding when a player is actually still kind of looking like he's in or near his prime, that it's time to get rid of that player, stuff like that. And that bumps up against a thing that's right near the start of your book and runs through the Patriots story, which is they also kind of famously take chances on players who, for characterological reasons, other teams have given up on. Players who are physically incredibly gifted, but there's kind of a knock on them. They're not a team player, or they're a discipline problem. They're an issue in the locker room. And Belichick, time and time again, goes and he wants to get those guys. And to me, those two things they don't make sense side by side. Discipline and a desire to go find a rebel.
Well, I think that, one of the reasons it does make sense is because Belichick, psychologically, I can't think of another coach in any of the sports leagues in America that are as astute as Belichick is in terms of understanding the psychology of athletes and football players in particular. What he sees in some of the guys you're thinking of, Corey Dillon, Randy Moss, Dante Stallworth, Rodney Harrison, these are all guys that had bad raps for one reason or another before they came to New England. These are also guys that had never won anywhere. And they're super competitive athletes who've never won. And so what Belichick sees is the chance to get a superior athlete, a Hall of Fame caliber player, who he can bring in, and he's confident that he can mold him to buy into their system, to do it their way. And he knows that these guys are so hungry for the one thing they don't have. They got all the talent in the world, but they have no hardware to show for it. And they're coming to the one place where they think they can actually get the hardware. And the reason they think that is because New England has hardware. They have more of it than anybody else. And so you have this built-in system there that it's magnetic for guys like that. And most of them, not all of them, but most of them, when they come, they succumb to the program. There's a great moment, and I actually loved writing about this, where Randy Moss
I know the story you're about to tell. Yeah, I know the story you're going to tell. Tell it, yeah.
Yeah, so they come to New England, and there's all kinds of questions about their character and their background and all this stuff. And in their first team meeting, Belichick stands up and berates Tom Brady. I mean, Brady is the superstar, not just of the team, but of the league. He is the man. And here's Belichick just ripping him down in the first team meeting. And Moss and Stallworth look at each other because they're sitting side by side, and they're like, holy, you know what? They're flabbergasted by what's happening. And they're also flabbergasted with the way Brady responds by not responding. In other words, it's as if Brady doesn't mind. Obviously, he does mind. He's a human being, but he tolerates it and he puts up with it. And as a result of it, guys like Moss and Stallworth think to themselves, hey, if Tom is taking it, we have to do that too. They get in line behind him. They line up and they go through the same gauntlet that he does. That's like a secret sauce that no other team has, where you have your superstar. Can you imagine Peyton Manning or Aaron Rodgers or any of these guys tolerating that year in and year out? The answer is no. But that was part of who Tom was. He was willing to do it for the sake of the team. And it got superstars who came there to do it as well.
Right. So I have to ask you about this, even though she's not a Titanic figure in your book, but Kat Pastor and I agreed. One of the people who didn't necessarily want to take it or think Tom Brady should have to take it is Gisele Bündchen, his supermodel wife. She's a really unusual athlete's wife. I mean, obviously she came into the marriage with her own portfolio. She was already really, really very, very famous. But, you know, whether it's kind of like chewing out the rest of the team in 2012 or saying that Bill Belichick has no right to talk to her husband like this, I mean, she emerges in your book as kind of, you know, a kind of unusually forceful sports wife who isn't afraid to say stuff that her husband would never say.
I actually loved writing about Gisele. Look, as you know, Colin, there's a number of women in this book who are strong figures, starting with Myra Kraft in the very early parts of this book. Drew Bledsoe's wife, Maura. This goes on and on. There's a lot of women in this narrative. And I think Gisele, you said she's not a Titanic figure. I would actually say she is a Titanic figure. She has a major role in this dynasty, and it's an underappreciated, underestimated, misunderstood role by most New England Patriots fans. She has a lot to do with why Tom stays in New England for as long as he does. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but their relationship is built that way. And that was really important for the longevity of his tenure there. I think that what makes her so interesting is when she marries Tom Brady, she is a bigger star than he is on the world stage. She is wealthier than he is. She has more power and influence than he does. And this is what makes their coupling so amazing and interesting from a writing standpoint. And it also is what sort of complicates things for the Patriots and for Belichick. But look, the fact that she is outspoken to a certain degree and she's not afraid to state her mind and her point of view, I think that's, you know, that says a lot actually about the quality of their relationship. And it also tells you a lot about Tom and the kind of man he is, the kind of husband he is, the kind of father he is. I mean, it's all part of that mix. And, you know, she's there and she's real. I mean, that's the thing. She is a presence in the dynasty. She plays an important role. And I can just say from my standpoint, I was glad to have someone like her, you know, enter the story when she did.
All right, so there's sort of another aspect of the Patriots legacy that's impossible not to write about and not to talk about once you've read Jeff's book. Some of it can be summed up in this clip from Saturday Night Live.
Dougie, did Tom Brady at any point instruct you to take air out of those footballs?
This man is a saint.
Oh, Dougie.
What, you think you can do what he does? He has won 3 Super Bowls, 6 if you include the losses. This man is a legend, a hero, and one day he is going to be the father of my child.
I'm sorry, what? Dougie, we just want the truth.
You can't handle the truth. Son, we live in a world that has balls, and those balls have to be inflated by men with pumps. Who's gonna do it? You? You, reporter Weinberg? You don't want the truth, because deep down in places you don't talk about at Super Bowl parties, you want me on that ball. You need me on that ball.
Did you deflate the ball?
I did the job I was told to do.
Did you deflate the ball?
You're damn right I did!
So that's the 2015 Saturday Night Live take on Deflategate. But, Jeff, in writing about this, you go through a number of the controversies, starting, in fact, with an argument about taping defensive hand signals. A feud ignites between two products of that amazing college football factory known as Wesleyan University, Bill Belichick and Eric Mangini from the Jets. And, by the way, Mangini is a Hartford guy, too, grew up not too far from here. So, yeah, explain what happens there.
I'm just laughing. I'm glad you included that clip from SNL because, as you know, I include that clip in the book because it's just so great. But look, this all starts because Mangini, who coached under Belichick in the first game of the 2007 season, he accused the Patriots in the middle of the game of cheating, of basically filming the hand signals from the Jets sideline during the game. What's important to note here as a backdrop is that the league had just issued a memo to every team telling them to stop doing that. And the reason the league did that is because everybody was doing that. This is not something that was unique to New England. The league was doing it, so they got a memo telling all the teams to quit filming hand signals. And this was the first game of the new season, and the Patriots did it in the first half, and they got caught. And they got punished for it and fined. And, you know, Belichick apologized. And we thought that was going to be the end of it. But what was more important, I think, and what's really stuck with the Patriots is that at the end of that season, the Patriots ran the table that year. They went 16-0. The taping of the Jets had nothing to do with the outcome of the game. They did break a rule, but it didn't affect the game. Then the Super Bowl comes, and they're facing the Giants. And literally on the eve of the Super Bowl, the Boston Herald accused the Patriots of something far more serious, far more egregious. The Herald claimed that years earlier, on the eve of the Super Bowl against the Rams in 2002, that the Patriots had illegally filmed the last practice of the Rams, which is called a walkthrough. That's a much bigger accusation. It's a felony in NFL terms. And everybody ran with it, from ESPN to the Washington Post, as if it had actually happened. Nobody really paid attention to the fact that 5 months later, the Boston Herald admitted on the front and back page that they were wrong, that didn't happen, and they never saw any tape. It was a made-up story. But even to this day, people still look at that, and they don't know that the Herald did that, and they believe that the Patriots have actually done this multiple times. I think it's the kind of thing when we talk about earlier, hating a team that wins all the time. It's part of that vernacular for the Patriots. It's something that's in their history, and in that case didn't really happen. But all of that stuff is connective tissue to the Deflategate scandal that came in 2014. And that scandal obviously got far more attention. That's the SNL skit than anything that happened before that. And I would just say, Colin, that I think the reality is, had it not been for the taping allegations in 2007, I don't think Deflategate would have got the kind of attention that it did in 2014.
I agree. We're talking to Jeff Benedict, and we're going to take a little break, and we'll come back. We're not going to have too much time here at the end.
So good. Thank you, Goskowski, for missing that kick outside the gooch. FYT Brady. FYT. It's really quite sad how much I enjoy watching Tom Brady. I'm deflated and annoyed. FYT Brady.
All right, we're back. I very quickly want to thank Kat Pastor. She's in the studio making the whole show work and hum and all that stuff. And Jonathan McPants, he is the producer of this episode. And there's going to be a whole other show tomorrow, but I'm not allowed to tell you what it is. So we're back with Jeff Benedict. He is the author of The Dynasty. We don't have a lot of time left, unfortunately, and that's actually a good sign. It means the show's been flying by really fast. We have to say a little bit about that. All three of these men that we've been talking about, Robert Kraft, Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, that, they have unusual ties to Donald Trump. That's nothing wrong with that as far as 74 million Americans are concerned. But what do you make of those connections?
I think that it's interesting because they're different, meaning the connections the three men have with him are very different. Robert's connection is one that he and his wife Myra formed with Donald and one of his prior wives when they became neighbors in Florida. And that's a relationship that was way before, Donald was president or anything else. And, it's a relationship that was more personal and it was built that way. Both Brady and Belichick don't even really meet Trump until they're with the Patriots and the Patriots start winning. And Trump sort of gravitates to them when the Patriots are winning. He starts inviting Brady to all kinds of things. In fact, by the time he decides to run for president, he asks Tom to speak at the Republican National Convention. Tom turned him down. I mean, Tom did not want to get involved in the politics of Donald Trump. And, despite the fact that I think Trump was, saying things about Tom publicly to make it sound as if like he was a big supporter. And then there's Bill, who did something, rather unusual for him, which was he essentially publicly endorsed Donald right before the election with Hillary by allowing Donald Trump to read aloud a letter that Belichick sent him. And Trump used it in New Hampshire to try to persuade New Hampshire voters to vote for him. That didn't happen. But nonetheless, it was a sort of an interesting twist for a coach who doesn't really advocate his players getting involved in things that become distractions from football. And so I do get into all of that in the book because I think that the relationships of the three men with this president are, they're not only interesting, but they're important in terms of that period in time for the dynasty.
And I think for Kraft, who, as I say, emerges as a much more complicated and in many ways admirable character than I would have expected going in, and there's a way in which, Andre Tippett, one of the former Patriots players who's black and has a front office job, just talks about, the way that Kraft had kind of stuck with him. And then you've got this guy, this politician, this president who says about players who kneel during the national anthem, somebody run out there and tackle that son of a bitch. And a lot of athletes of color were really, really troubled, particularly by that turn of phrase, if you could call it that. And
yes.
It does seem as though it bothered Kraft too, because in fact he has a relationship with his black players that doesn't really fit that kind of language.
Well, it bothered him immensely because that's not who he is, and it's not how he thinks. And it's such a departure from who Kraft is as a human being. And so that is why I think he was the first and only owner to come out publicly with a critical statement in response to the president's statement about Colin Kaepernick. Despite being the one who probably had the closest relationship to the president of all the owners in the NFL, he was the only one who came out publicly and criticized that statement and that kind of talk. And I think that it shows you something about who Kraft is. Look, the things that Trump did and said in his 4 years were very disruptive to the NFL. They caused a lot of problems. They hurt people in the NFL. They hurt the league. It was divisive rhetoric that really, like so many other things he said, were kind of designed to be that. And the NFL, obviously wasn't expecting any of that, but it fed right into it. And I think that, the league is obviously in a very different place today than they were when Trump started saying that stuff.
So we've only got about a minute left. Obviously, Brady is gone. Gronkowski is gone. Belichick is doing Subway commercials that actually make fun of his cranky, hatchet-faced image. Is the dynasty over? You've got about 30 seconds to answer that question.
The dynasty that we know is over because Brady's gone. And I would have said the same thing if Belichick had left or if Kraft stopped being the owner. It requires the three of them. Doesn't mean there can't be another dynasty, but the one we've watched for 20 years is now part of New England history.
All right, so the book is The Dynasty. It is authored by Jeff Benedict. This has been a lot of fun, even though it's about the Patriots, and I don't like them very much either. But thanks to everybody, especially Jeff and Jonathan and Kat. Thank you.